Welcome to this discussion on cellular adaptations. Now, cellular adaptation refers to the changes that a cell undergoes in response to stimuli or stress. Now, this stimulus or stress, if persistent, can lead to cellular injury, but before that, the cell tries to cope with the new environment and undergoes a process called cellular adaptation. Now, cellular adaptation can either be physiological or pathological. An example of physiological cellular adaptation would be uterine enlargement during pregnancy, and that of pathological cellular adaptation would be left ventricular hypertrophy due to aortic stenosis, when the left ventricle has to pump blood through a very narrow aortic valve. Now let's look at the different types of adaptations side by side. Okay. Now, firstly, hypertrophy. Hypertrophy is often accompanied by an increase in cellular protein production. Okay, cellular protein is going to be increased, which eventually is going to increase the cell size. Now, hypertrophy can also be either physiological, such as that of the gravid uterus, which is going to be an example of both hypertrophy and hyperplasia, as we'll see later, and breast development during lactation. And usually it occurs proximal to the obstruction, such as that of aortic stenosis resulting in left ventricular hypertrophy, and obstruction of urethra, which will lead to bladder hypertrophy. Okay. Next, we'll look at hyperplasia. Now, hyperplasia is characterized by increase in cell number. Okay. Now, these cells can be both stem cells or differentiated cells. But one thing to remember about hyperplasia is that it does not occur in permanent tissues. That is, for example, in nerves or in cardiac tissue. Examples of hypertrophy include breast development during pregnancy and puberty, endometrial hyperplasia due to excessive stimulation by estrogen, and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Now let's look at atrophy. Atrophy is a decrease in cell size and cell number. Now, the reason why this happens is because of disuse, ischemia, denervation, malnutrition, or decreased hormonal stimulation. Okay, so example would be endometrial atrophy due to decreased estrogen. The mechanism via which atrophy occurs is apoptosis and ubiquitin proteasome degradation pathway. Okay, so apoptosis will result in decreased cell number, and this will result in decreased cell size. The mechanism of the ubiquitin proteasome degradation pathway is such that the intermediate filaments of the cytoskeleton, they are tagged with ubiquitin. Okay, and then these tagged filaments are degraded by proteasomes. Okay, now let's look at metaplasia. Now, metaplasia is the conversion of one type of cell into another, which is more suited to adapt to the new stress. Okay, so what can happen is that one type of epithelium can convert into another, or one type of mesenchymal tissue can be converted into another. So epithelial metaplasia example would be Barrett's esophagus, and an example of mesenchymal metaplasia would be myocytic ossification, which is essentially muscle converting into bone. Okay, so this is actually a stress adaptation, and it is reversible. So what happens is that the stem cells are reprogrammed, and one type of cell is converted into another type based on the fact that the next type is more fitted to withstand the circumstances that the new environment has presented. Okay. Lastly, we'll look at dysplasia. Now, dysplasia is not a true adaptive response. It is characterized by a loss of uniformity in cell size, cell shape, orientation, and nuclear changes. That is, nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio is disrupted. Now, dysplasia is a precancerous condition. It is a growth of epithelial cells, and it can range from mild to severe forms. Mild forms can be reversible, and the severe forms are often irreversible and can lead to cancerous growth. Now, I hope this is clear, and I'll see you in the next one.